like to say, first of all, that Jay and I know each other for 65 years. We were both freshmen on the wrestling team at Columbia College. I never won a match. I don't know about Jay, but I was always beaten, so I gave up wrestling as a career. Anyway, I think that Jay and I are similar in some way in that we both came from working class backgrounds. You would think that money would be a real concern for us, that we'd want to earn a great deal of money in terms of education. But that's not what happened at Columbia. I think Columbia really changed both of us. And when we started writing, I think we wrote in a very different way. We wanted to be bold novelists. We wanted to be adventurous novelists, not necessarily successful ones. I was wondering, Jay, if you agreed with my feeling.
I would have been very happy to be a successful novelist. When I started out, I mean, we both, I wrote 2 novels while I was an undergraduate, completed 2. I think you did also, or maybe 1? One novel.
Takes me longer.
But when I left Columbia, my notion about what I wanted to do to support my habit of writing was that I would always find some way to earn a living not related to writing, I thought.
Yeah.
And that way I would be free to write what I wanted to write. I wouldn't be dependent on the writing to, for rent. Fortunately, at a certain point when I did a bunch of different things, the first decade or so after Columbia, including time as a junior executive trainee for the General Motors Corporation, believe it or not. Worked with disabled kids, muscular dystrophy kids in the summer program, different things. And then I was not set upon teaching as a career.
Yeah.
But when like you, I published when I was young, in my 20s, published a few books, and I began getting offers to teach. And I said, gee, okay, the hours are really, college teaching, the hours are really good. I mean, Saul Bellow famously said, college teaching is a racket. It's, your time is your own, you can grade papers whenever you want, and I lucked into a couple of very nice writing positions so that I've been able always to write the books I want to write. If they succeed in the marketplace, that's even better. I can take a nice trip, go to a good restaurant. But both we were on the freshman wrestling team together, then we were in our first writing class together with Bob Waddell.
And we were massacred.
I started out in freshman English with C-.
You were lucky.
But, the only difference, I think, sometimes, dealing, as most writers have to, unless they've led very charmed lives, dealing with not being able to having no assurance that the next book you write will be published does take a toll. Not ultimately, the book of mine that was probably most successful in the marketplace, Imagining Robert, which was my 10th book, that was passed on or turned down 41 times by 41 publishers over a 3-year period. My attitude was, well, still a good book, I hope it'll be published. But what it does is it sometimes takes maybe an hour more to get to my desk in the morning during those periods. But once I begin typing and I'm lost in words, language, and fantasies, really, because even writing memoirs, which both of us have done, involves as much imagination as memory.
Well, I know that when I started out, I lived in a one-room closet, and I think I could have lived there for the rest of my life, and I didn't in any way feel deprived. I didn't
Well, you
feel
had all that
deprived.
tuna fish, Jerry.
And not only that, I was robbed once, and the robber took pity on me and left me one suit because I was a substitute teacher. But the thing is, as writers, as we are, Jay and I, you have to be attuned to failure. You have to be able to accept the blow. Because if you can't accept the blow, you can't continue. And you yourself, I was just wondering, in that town you described, I think it's called Sparaced, is that right? Is that the town you lived in?
Yeah.
And yeah. So, it is in a way autobiographical, but the two main characters.
But Jerry, although I'm Jewish, as you are, I didn't become a doctor.
You did, Jay, but you just don't
Not yet.
remember it. You just don't remember it. That's it. Your memory is failing you.
What's your name?
But the thing is, the AIDS doctor, and this again goes back to the sympathy, because Saul Davidoff, who's I can't say he's the hero, but he's the character who appeals to me most. And the opening chapter takes place in Paris at the Café Flore, which was once the meeting place of Sartre and Camus, and now it's the most commercial place in the world. It's a horror to be in, I know. I would never go there, if anybody invited me. But the thing is, it starts out with a young woman who meets Camus. They have a one-night stand, and a few months later, he dies. And yet Camus' ghost is a kind of presence throughout the novel. I mean, Camus is there.
I fell in love with Camus' writing when I was 17. My first year at Columbia. My second year, I took a French course with Donald Frame, the world-renowned Montaigne expert at the time, lovely man, who became a mentor to me. And I read The Stranger in French for the first time. And then I kept reading Camus. And to some degree, not just his work, but the fact that he was a writer and also a man who was very engagé in the world. During World War II, he risked his life in Paris as editor of Combat, the Resistance, the underground newspaper of the Resistance. He also grew up very poor in Algeria. His father died when he was 2 years old. His mother was illiterate, and actually, I think it's in chapter 1, he's dedicating the book he had in the car with him when he died in a crash, is dedicated to his mother, whom he writes in a note in his journal, will never be able to read this book. She was illiterate. And so the fact that this enormous talent and a man of real courage as a writer and as a man, a political man, a politically engaged man, and also a man who loved life. I mean, he loved going
women.
out with friends. He loved women. On his trip to Paris, he writes to the 3 different women he's been having liaisons with, and he hopes to see all of them. And he was able to maintain long-time friendships with women he had relationships with, intimate relationships with. But I think there's something else, Jerry, and maybe it goes back to movies, is I do think one of the things we novelists, all of us, have learned from movies is the ability to cut from one thing to another. Now, in the movies, we're very accustomed to that. And I have a feeling that influenced not my ability or my instinct to do it, but the freedom I felt to do it. that you can simply leave it blank and leave it a mystery. I didn't know if I was even going to ever come back to it. What was important to me was that they get to this village, and I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know if they could put the marriage back together, although they're living under the shadow of Camus, because Camus, who suffered from, I don't like it, Camus had tuberculosis, and he spent a year in Cabris, which is a village perché, one of these villages in France that are on three sides of a mountain, like a triangle overlooking a valley. And it's about, when I lived in Speracet and where they go, I did put them in the village I know. It's, straight up 100 yards maybe from where Camus spent a year, which also is meaningful. It wasn't meaningful to me at the time. I'm not sure I even knew that he had lived there when I first lived there, but it's meaningful to them that he's sort of above them, looking down on them, or his ghost is. We come to know each other as people in many different ways, but one way, especially in a novel which has to do deeply about friendship. I'm going to jump around a little, but one of the wonderful things for me about reading Camus' journals is to read his articulation of the importance in life of friendship, and how friendship is what will carry the day for most of us through dark times and remind us of who we are when we've had a hard time and begin to come back to ourselves. The title was just always there for me. It has a couple of meanings. It's what happens to them after Camus, when they go on with their lives. It also is in the sense of when you write a poem in the style of another poet. It's called After Byron, after Dickinson. And to some degree, I had one reader already who told me he thought that the first chapter read as if it were written by Camus. And I don't know that I intended that, but I don't think it's a mystical experience at all, but we don't know always where the gifts are coming to us. What we hope, I go through, and Jerry does too, I know, I use up lots of trees to make even a chapter, many revisions. But once I trust my instincts at the beginning, and sometimes I go off on paths that are no good, I come back, and then I work with it to make sure it makes sense as an object, because to me a book is an object the way sculpture is. But after Camus simply means in all the different ways that you take after someone, yeah. But I often don't have a title right away. This time I did. She offered to meet him at the train station in Paris when he returned in January, and he accepted the offer. Her friendship had become, he wrote, of immeasurable importance to him, for, as he had confided in his journal on the day her most recent letter arrived, what made the world bearable for him were feelings engendered by those elements that joined us to others. Mm-hmm. There's also the whole notion of the absurd, but friendships helped us through life, he explained, because they presupposed more of the same, a future, and because they made us sense that our only true task was to have friendships with others. And yet, on those days when we became aware that this was perhaps not our only task, and above all, when we realized that it was only our will that kept others attached to us. For if we stopped writing or talking, if we cut ourselves off from others, we realized how swiftly the others melted away. People were always ready and able to be interested in something else. So that when we came to understand how contingent and accidental everything in what we called love or friendship was, the world went back to darkness and returned us to that great cold from which human tenderness had for a moment rescued us. And that's Albert Camus, and that's me using something I found. But I think that is at the heart, for me, of what made him, despite, in addition to his brilliance, and gifts as a storyteller, that made him so wonderfully human and understanding all kinds of things about how we do and don't survive, which is what the book to some degree is about.
The plague has come back in fashion because of COVID. Right. So Camus is very much in the news, but you suggest something else, that there is no relationship between the generations. That something happens, it's very powerful, and then it disappears. And it's Jay's job, in some sense, to evoke that past, to bring that past back. I personally hated the plague, but it doesn't really matter, because it's very, very important to the novel. And I think that what makes the novel so extraordinary is that, like an accordion, it sort of collapses and expands and takes us from one generation to the next in a very, very powerful way.
Remember, the novel as we know it really doesn't come into being in English until Robinson Crusoe, Fielding, end of the 18th century. I mean, it's just a fairly new form. Movies, the cinema is even more new. So what does not die, and maybe this will be a nice note to end on, storytelling doesn't die, whether the storytelling is in a novel, a short story, a poem, a movie, a television show, a painting, a symphony, which has its own, line that we follow and that has its own narrative. Faulkner said if he could have written music, he would never have written a word on paper. Anyway, thank you for coming.